Make sure you watch this entire video. By the end, hopefully you have some practical advice on how you can begin to start training your mental visualizations and being able to use this and convert them into actual drawings. Let's begin. So our end goal was to have a mental picture and be able to convert this into an image. We can use this to draw from our imagination, our memory, etc. The biggest question is how. Before we get into the how, I first want to talk about a disclaimer. So let me add this disclaimer here. I'm gonna write the words aphantasia. So people who have diagnosed aphantasia, and aphantasia is a condition where you can't see mental imagery. For those of you with diagnosed aphantasia, this video is not for you. For a resource for you, drawbox.com. The reason why I recommend drawbox.com is because the main teacher of that course also has aphantasia. So, with the disclaimer out the way, let's move on into the how. The biggest thing of concern is first, we have to be able to see an image in our minds. Well, I sat there and I pondered for a while and I just let images flow. And there were two main ways in which I could control the type of imagery that I get in my mind. The first one is reading. For example, my mom hit me with a frying pan. If you read this passage, there's some vague, what happens is there's a vague image that flashes in your mind. Vague idea of this event happening, right? You can see this happening. You can see your mom hitting you with a frying pan. The second and probably the most powerful way to see mental imagery is through memories. I want you to think about this phrase here. I want you to think about this phrase here. I remember that like it was yesterday. Now we all have these phrases that we have in mind. Well, we all have these experiences that we have in mind that happened a while ago, but it feels like we have so much memory of what happened. It feels like it happened yesterday, right? So both reading and memories are ways in which we can invoke mental imagery. So off to the side, we're going to have our visualization process. So reading and memories are two ways that invoke a mental image. Both of these are ways in which we can see a mental image in our mind. You can read a passage, my mom hit me with a frying pan, boom, an image flashes in your mind. You can think of something that feels like it happened yesterday, a very strong memory, and once again, images are flash in your mind. So I had another thought. How can I control this? So my next question is, how can I control this? Let's start with let's start with reading. If we look at our example, my mom hit me with a frying pan. Your mom obviously, I hope not. Let's all hope your mom didn't actually hit you with a frying pan. But we know that this event more than likely did not happen. And with us knowing that this event did not happen, that it's something that I just made up on the fly, then we can actually control the passages that invoke a mental image. And this is why a lot of people say that you should write while you're drawing. The biggest thing with my mom hit me with the frying pan is that you're saying that in your mind. So the biggest thing that comes from reading is our internal monologue. Our internal monologue can create phrases to invoke a mental image. This can be trained. So that's reading, our internal monologue. This is the biggest takeaway. Our internal monologue here. So let's move on to memories. What is a controllable way in which we could have our memories invoke mental images as well? Recall an experience. And one thing about memories is that this forms a much clearer picture. Now, one thing about memories, if the picture is not clear enough, then a symptom or this is a sign that you were not paying attention during that moment. You're not paying enough attention during that particular moment. Let's give an example for a memory. The easiest memory that You could think of recalling is what you ate. What was the last thing that you ate? And recall that experience. And just try to recall as much of that experience as possible. If this is hard for you, more than likely you were distracted while you were eating. And you could have been distracted by watching TV, talking, scrolling on your phone. No matter what it was, the fact of the matter is you were just more distracted or your focus was somewhere else during that particular moment that allowed you not to be able to recall as much information about the experience of you last eating, right? So to circumvent this, you have to be able to be more present and observe more in a moment to moment. Just a side note moving forward, right? Be more present and observe more moment to moment. And this will greatly help you to recall your experiences. I basically gave you all of the details for something we're going to call the visualization process. So step 1, see mental imagery. You're going to do that by utilizing inner dialogue and memories. So we have the mental image, right? Our next step is to be able to hold on to this image. And this is what Jung Gi calls floating an image in his head. The solution to this is actually pretty simple. We already figured that out in step 1. You just repeat step 1. Whatever inner monologue that you had to invoke a mental image, or whatever memory that you had to invoke that mental image, repeat it. And you're going to repeat this constantly to hold on to this mental image. For now, step 2 is we're going to call it floating an image, just like Kim Jung Gi says, floating the image. When we're trying to hold on to this image, what we want to do is allow our monologue and our memory to work together. We want our inner monologue and our memory, we want these two to work together. And the best way I can describe this, think of both memory and monologue carrying pieces of information. We can say monologue has information A and memory has information B. The memory itself has a visual piece of information B. And then you also have an inner dialogue or inner monologue about what happened in that memory. And that could be words, phrases, and actions. Now, these two combine together to make the new picture AB, where we're combining the information from the monologue and we're combining the information from the memory. Both your monologue and your memory are both invoking a mental image. If we're taking both the visual information that the monologue creates and the memory creates, we have a new image, AB. That's all it's used for. It's just to reinforce that image that we want to hold on to. That's all we're trying to do. So the monologue is describing the memory has its own visual information, and you're describing that extra information within that memory with the monologue to create an image that you want to try to hold on to as long as possible. This is the hardest part. It's floating that image in your mind. And the more these two interact with each other, the longer that you can actually float this image in your mind. And now that brings us to step 3. Step 3 is another hard thing, abstraction. We do simple abstractions all the time. And abstractions and calculations, it's the process is all the same. If you can add 27 plus 15 in your mind, right? You will notice there's a lot of different ways in which you'll do 27 plus 15 in your mind. You can actually visualize the 27 and 15 and you can carry the 1 and do all the extra math, right? Or you could add 3 to the 27, you get 30, and you subtract the 3 from 15, so it's more so 30 plus 12, and now you get 42 here. There's different ways in which your mind can abstract math and actually solve the math problem. What we want to do is do the same thing when it comes to drawing. And by abstraction, we want to just basically convert those into the primitives. We want to be able to abstract the information inside of our mental image into these primitives. And this is where we really start beginning to think about spatial problems. Simple ways you can solve spatial problems is actually with one-dimensional maps. So a one-dimensional map is, just think of a graph. We have a graph, you have the x-axis, you have the y-axis, and then say this is me sitting on a chair. We have just a dot and we call this dot me, one-dimensional map. Just a point in space, me. And then we say in front of me there's a dresser, right? And then to the right of me, you can say there's a television. So this is us creating a one-dimensional map of the different various objects that's around me, just so we can start understanding what needs to be abstracted into the 3D primitives. Step two should be happening at the exact same time during the step to keep that image floating. You don't want to drop the image. These are happening at the same time. They're happening in parallel. Then finally, this is when you grab all the abstractions and all the different information that you grabbed from the previous 3 steps and you bring it all together and actually start putting that down on canvas. And this is where fundamentals fundamentals fill in the gaps. Also, what you know. What you know about the objects, the minute details, the past experience you might have drawn the thing before, the different functions of the different thing, any small details, etc. But one side note about this is that the smallest details should be saved until the end. We now have the visualization process. So we have the process down. Number one, see the mental imagery, float in the image, abstraction, canvas. So how do we practice this? So for now, I have 2 exercises, but this is something that you should constantly practice on a daily basis, no matter what skill level you are, because the better you are at this, the easier everything else gets. The first thing is, I'm going to call this remote viewing. And essentially, all I'm really saying with remote viewing is being able to mentally see yourself from different positions in space, in the space that you're sitting in. You're sitting here, and then you have a bed here, and you also have a dresser D here. Imagine what it looked like if you were sitting on the bed looking at yourself, or imagine what it'll look like if you were sitting right next to the dresser looking at yourself, and try to project yourself to these different points in space to view yourself differently. And this is a mental exercise. And what this does is gives you control of your inner camera. Jung Gi states that he sends his mini-me's around a scene to find the most pleasing angle and composition. This right here is essentially what he's doing with that whole mini-me situation. The second exercise is memory recall. Now, I've been doing this before bed and with my eyes closed. I try to remember in much detail as possible the memory of what's in my room and where they're placed to float an image in my mind. I sit with my eyes closed and I start with an inner monologue. And this is to invoke mental imagery. The inner monologue is basically the memory of everything that I know that's in my room and what's around me. And I do this to try to float the image in my mind. So things I'm thinking about, the spatial physical config of my room, once again, it's that one-dimensional map where I have some points. I'm here, dresser's here, TV's here. As I'm doing this exercise, I'll start seeing the visual memory of the personal objects. So say I'm looking at the 1D map and I think of my TV. A mental image of my TV will start flashing in my head. Once the mental image flashes in your head, you have to try to float that image. Once you float that image, you then try to convert this into the 3D primitives. And then you can layer more details as much as you remember about this particular object. Now, to actually add complexity to this exercise, you can create the mental thumbnails containing the whole 3D abstraction and then draw it later. But for now, you really only have to focus on the mental exercise of this part. And then once you get enough practice with the mental exercise, begin to start drawing it and do this a lot. So this was basically my plan of being able to abstract and draw from visualization, memory, and imagination. So I hope you guys found this information helpful. I do think I'm gonna have a part two, a continuation of this video. If you guys like this video, please be sure to leave the feedback down below. Hit that like button, hit subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys in my next video.